Hello and welcome, Connie, Braun, and Miriam Stewart-Kroeker. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on behalf of Hamilton Arts and Letters, affectionately known as HA&L, about your involvement with Following the Moonroad. For our audience who may not yet be familiar with this composition, which is featured in the most recent edition, the current edition of HA&L, let me explain that it was commissioned by the Kitchener-Waterloo DaCapo Chamber Choir and performed in March of 2019. As described by Leonard Enns, DaCapo's artistic director and conductor, this powerful new work for choir and cello features an original score by the Canadian composer Christine Donkin and specially commissioned poetry from 3 Canadian poets with refugee ancestry. It is such an honor to have you, Connie, as one of the contributing poets to Following the Moonroad, and you, Miriam, as the solo cellist, with me here now to describe your experiences, both with DaCapo and your personal connections to Mennonite history. I'd like to begin by asking each of you to talk a bit about your Mennonite heritage or connection. Connie, could I ask you to address the impact of the Mennonite history of diaspora and flight on your artistry, on your poetry?
That is the theme: dispossession, dislocation. The refugee immigrant experience is the theme of most of my writing. And I came to it honestly because my parents were refugee immigrants to Canada. I'm of the first generation born in Canada. And so those stories were stories that I really wanted to excavate and understand about my own heritage, which is Mennonite. World War II refugee immigrants to Canada post, I guess they came in the 1950s. So post-war refugees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were your grandparents part of that as well, that exodus?
Yes, my grandparents came to Canada in their 50s. They had absolutely nothing. And they had a large family, children ranging from their teens to maybe adolescent, and the youngest would have been quite young. And so they relied on the kids to help them get established, to bring in, everybody went to work. You know, it's the immigrant story that is common to many people who come here and have to start over with very little help, except for maybe help from the community. And so the Mennonite community in Canada, in particular in British Columbia, where my family settled, their church community, they would be the ones that would help them find a place to maybe live in. In my parents' case, my dad also, who has this history, it would have been a chicken coop on a farm that was reconstructed or repositioned to serve as a home. So
now, I've noticed in your poetry that there's so much witnessing of the previous generations, both what they spoke of and the things that you had to intuit through their silences. And I found that very, very moving, very affecting in the poetry.
And I did use poetry because I thought it was the most intimate way. I've written about this in nonfiction as well. But poetry leaves room for silences, which is a huge part of their story. I wanted to understand their stories so that I could understand them. But their stories also included a lot of silences. There's a lot of dark history that we are only now turning towards to try and understand. Because they were not, they were not the only people that suffered. They were also from a group that inflicted suffering. So, during the war. So it's a very complex history. And another writer who writes about her religious heritage and heritage from Eastern Europe told me, this is very complex and it will probably take you a lifetime. Yeah. And, so I am continuing with these themes.
Yeah. Or several lifetimes, several generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Miriam, could I ask you to tell us a bit about your background, either in terms of your Mennonite heritage or your musical involvement with Mennonites such as Leonard Enns.
Yeah, so my dad's side of the family is Russian Mennonite. That's where I get my Mennonite heritage. They emigrated from the Ukraine in the late 1800s. So that would have been my great-great-grandparents. And they settled in Manitoba. And growing up in Hamilton, we were far away from my Mennonite family, and we weren't part of a Mennonite church here. But I always kind of felt, you know, like that was a big part of my identity. Maybe it was just, you know, going out to Manitoba every summer and reconnecting with our family out there. But it wasn't until I moved to Waterloo when I started my undergraduate studies at Laurier that I really started kind of connecting with Mennonites in Ontario at all.
Right.
So my dad had some former, I think he knew, so Jim Pankratz, he was a professor at Conrad Grebel University College for quite a while. And they, I think, were former classmates. So he reached out to him. He said, I had to live at Grable because, you know, they have the best Mennonite food, and of course, and they're very focused on community building. And even though it's a university college that's affiliated with the University of Waterloo, and I was at Laurier, but they take a few students every, you know, here and there if they have Mennonite connections. So that's why I ended up there. Actually, just a small side note, my dad's uncle also taught at Grable, Jim Reimer, for a number of years. Well, for a long time. That was his career there. So that was kind of neat. I got to know Jim and his wife, Margaret, a little bit. Anyway, so I lived at Grable for a number of years, 2 years in residence and a year in the apartment complex that they have there. And I think the first time that I collaborated, so sorry, backtrack a little bit. Grable is a residence, but it's also an academic college. And they try to bring those two together every week. They have community dinners, and they want, you know, the two to interact. And so I guess word got out at a certain point that there was a cellist studying at Laurier, so I started getting asked to play for things. So Len, I think, first asked me to play in my first or second year as part of a Christmas chapel service. And I did a piece by Tim Corliss, who's also a Canadian composer. And I think, anyway, it was with the chapel choir there, I think. Anyway, and then I also was asked to play for another professor, Ken Hall, who works at Grable, and he formed this group called Spiritus, and we do play a lot of Bach cantatas and other works like that. And it's become quite a successful ensemble that has been around for 11 years now, I think, and I've been playing with them since I was a student. So that's been really neat. Actually, our first kind of COVID performance is this coming Sunday online, if you want to check that out.
Ooh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, the caliber of the playing, this has been really interesting for me because I've worked with these professors since I was, you know, pretty early undergrad. And I've progressed a lot since then. So my development from, you know, second year university to postgraduate work has been significant. So it's been really neat to work with them throughout. And I do feel like also they kind of set me up with these Mennonite connections in the community, and there are a lot of Mennonites in the Waterloo region, so that's been really neat. And I also have felt really welcomed as, you know, a Mennonite in this community, and I don't think I've ever really been a part of a community of Mennonites, apart from my family, you know, so that was kind of neat. And then with Len, I've collaborated a number of other times. I played in 2012 with the DaCapo Chamber Choir for the first time. I think we did that same piece that I did when I first collaborated with him. So that piece by Tim Corliss, and I did a solo piece as well. And then anyway, this Moonroad project has been the most recent collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. Well, that in fact, you take me to the second question that I have for both of you. And that's what it was like, what your experience was like working with the Moonroad, following the Moonroad. So Connie, I'm going to turn to you for an account both of composing for DaCapo and Christine Donkin, and also what it was like witnessing the world premiere of Following the Moonroad. What was your experience of hearing it live?
Okay, so I had been commissioned to write poetry, and the request came from Christine. And the request was very open-ended. She was very generous. She said, you know, I understand that you write on these themes. I would like you to write something for this composition. Could you please, you know, write 2 poems and whatever comes. And when I thought about the refugee experience and just the idea of a musical composition, and you know, I had this thought about the moon, and it came from Mary Ruffley. I think she wrote an essay that talked about the moon is a symbol of love and death, and in darkness, creatures turn their gaze to the moon. And that was just the image that informed the poetry. And when Christine got them, I was just absolutely, first of all, amazed, stunned at what she had done with them musically. But what she told me later that she decided to do when she saw them, she knew how the whole thing was going to unfold, because if you've heard the DaCapo perform it, you know that there are some very different experiences. George Elliott Clarke's and Lozan, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her last name, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, Yamolky, I'm guessing.
Yes, okay. And hers was a more recent experience, but when she framed the piece that way, I couldn't wait to, you know, see how this would unfold. So when we were listening to it and I heard Miriam play the cello, I could barely contain my emotions. Like, I sat there, I think it was almost an out-of-body experience. And I knew that I think it's the D note, yes, that is sustained all the way through the piece, was that moon that follows the various different refugee experiences of the people in the darkness and also in the light. And, you know, I've been thinking a lot about, I guess, I can't remember her first name, it'll come to me, but she talks about equanimity. And that word like really resonates with, you know, being Mennonite, because you think, well, it's about being pragmatic, but she reframes it to say that, no, it's about holding both joy and sorrow. And so that D note held the joy and sorrow all the way through that composition for me. So for me, it was so moving. It was really a highlight of any of the things I've done. And I was so thrilled after that, because I had never written for music before, and or had my pieces put to music. But since then, I've had the occasion to submit more poetry to another composer who has completed a work as well. So it's just really opened up a whole new way of listening to poetry for me. And I am just, I was so thrilled how the music carried the silences and the words. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful experience.
Yes, absolutely. I was very, very deeply affected by the performance as well. So Miriam, my question for you then is about what it was like for you to perform this deeply affecting music at the world premiere. And the second question is also one about, do you perceive that performance differently now in the wake of COVID-19, where, of course, all these live performances have been forestalled? Does it give an added intensity to your memory of it?
Yeah, so just a very quick side note in case there's anyone out there who listens to it who has perfect pitch, it's an A, but we're very close. Anyway, so when I performed that piece back in the spring of 2019, the short answer is no. I didn't really have. I felt like, you know, I was 7 months pregnant. I had a toddler, and I had a very busy performance schedule. I just didn't. I put a lot of effort into it, but I didn't feel like I had time to really take it in or to, you know, understand exactly the effect of the piece and what it all meant. You know, I just didn't feel like I had the time and space to do that. But listening back, especially watching that video that you made, Grace, and having the chance to see the words while listening to it, it affected me a lot. Like, it was just a very different experience as an audience. But it's always like that as a musician, you know, when you perform something, it's always a very different experience from being an audience member. So it's really special to be able to, you know, listen to it and watch it without having to think about, you know, what notes I'm playing or anything like that. And then to answer your other question, yes, I think it is very different. But I think now that, you know, we're in a pandemic, obviously the arts have been hit, the performing arts have been hit really, really hard. So I think that, you know, makes listening to a live performance that much more emotional right now. But also, I think that COVID has kind of intensified all of these political issues that are kind of referenced in the piece. You know, it talks about, you know, not only issues that are relevant today, but historically, racism, relocation, how refugees are received into a country, and you know, given the pandemic and also like the political climate, especially this week, I think it's extremely relevant, and I think it's going to be relevant for a long time. And I think, you know, the most meaningful pieces that I've learned in my career are the ones that reflect the times in which they were written. And this kind of piece is going to, you know, be relevant for a really long time. So I think that's been a really special thing to be a part of. And I think that it's really important to share with other people right now.
Yeah, I think that's very astute, Miriam. That's very helpful as well. So just to any audience members, I've already mentioned that we have included Following the Moonroad in this current edition of HA&L. And as Miriam pointed out, it has been made into a video in which there are images as well as all of the poetic texts accompanying it. You can see as well the original program from DaCapo, which Leonard Enns has so generously allowed us to publish, and the poems as well of George Elliott Clarke and Lozan Yamolky are all available there. And I really do hope that people will listen to it because it is so rich and so affecting. So I want to once again thank both of you for your generosity in joining me and helping us to celebrate the launch of this special edition of HA&L on Mennonites. And I offer that thanks both on behalf of myself and of the general editors. It has been such an incredible pleasure speaking with both of you, and I wish you all the best in your continued endeavors and wish you safety as well.